Courage Chat. And today I'm going to talk to an old friend of mine, an artist, likely one of the first artists I met, working artists that I met in town.
Yeah, you were. Yeah.
Yeah. And you were my boss for a short. Sorry.
Oh, good Lord, I wasn't I?
You were my boss. Yeah. I was doing, when I first came out, I got a gig. I think Jerry Thompson got me the gig. You got me hired to do caricature art on the strip. That's got to be one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. Not because of the drawing, but just it was brutal. But anyway, I'm jumping ahead. So this is F. Andrew Taylor. He's a Las Vegas artist. He's published author. He's a cartoonist. He's a graphic designer. He's a well-published writer everywhere. You can see stuff he's written all over the place, and he's very prolific in his creativity and his artwork. And it's going to be a fun chat with him. Talk about some of these things. I happened to found this.
Oh my gosh!
Wow. In my library, I've got this.
I love the name Dante's Casino. I still think it's one of the cleverest names I've ever come up with. Dante's Casino.
Yeah, it's funny because the green screen, you see, it's hollow. It's because of the green screen. It's got the hollow thing.
Oh yeah,
because you got some green at the bottom of it. But
right, I got that gaming table green in the cover.
Yeah, he's a great. I love the style. His use of black is fantastic, and he has a very unique. I could pick out your hands, your style from a mile away. I've always appreciated the way you draw hands. I like. I know that's odd, but I like how you do them. There's this particular way that you do them that I enjoy. But
that's interesting.
Yeah, we notice those kinds of things, right? I think.
Yeah,
Charles,
I mean,
I think Charles.
I've never been.
Go ahead. Sorry, we're talking to each other. Go ahead.
I've never been greatly fond of my hands, but then I saw Dave Sim was talking. I saw an interview with Dave Sim or somebody was talking where he was complaining about how he drew hands, and saying whoever he was talking to was like Gene Day or some big other comic artist. He's you draw Dave Sim hands. Yeah, so you draw the hands you draw. I'm like, oh yeah, so I draw Andy Taylor hands. I'm glad you like them.
I like him. I read somewhere that Charles Schultz one time said about Bill Watterson. He said, "That's the boy that draws those nightstands really well. I like his nightstands." He's really good at drawing nightstands. I was like, well, sure. that's getting a compliment from Charles Schultz, I imagine, is pretty great. I'm not sure he was handing those out very liberally in the day, but that's pretty cool. But Bill Watterson is pretty amazing. Does anybody know where he is, or if he's vanished? Did he vanish?
It seems to be somebody's written about that recently. He's just off the grid. He doesn't want to be bothered.
That's commendable.
Yeah,
I think that's pretty commendable. But anyway, let's talk about you. So why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself? I know it's like a vast and wide history.
Yeah, I went to art school for painting, but I'd always wanted to do comics. But right after art school, I just sort of stumbled around doing some retail stuff. I worked in the comic shop for a while. I moved to Georgia for no really good reason, but somebody else was going to Georgia. I'm like, I'll come, because I kind of realized I was spinning my wheels. I was in Boston at the time, and I realized I was going nowhere. So took the change and went down to Georgia. And again, wasn't doing really much. I was dating a girl down there. I was working at a print shop, and she was going to a college down there, and she saw a flyer for caricature artists. So I went up and talked to these guys, and they said, oh, it's not great, but we could probably show you a few things and try this and come back. And I did. And I said, all right, that's better. Try this and come back. And we did that 3 or 4 times. And then finally they said, okay, sit down. I'm like, So then I was drawn. So I spent the summer working at Six Flags over Georgia, down in near Atlanta. And after the summer ended, the park closes because they have weather down there. And the guy that ran the place said, we have an operation down in Vegas. I said, I'll go to Vegas. And he came back the next week and said, well, really, we don't need to be in Vegas. We have an operation in Laughlin. And I said, what's Laughlin? That's gotta be.
Right. What's Laughlin?
So I worked for 6 months in Laughlin before I ended up coming up to Vegas. But then after doing characters for a couple of years, a couple of cartoonists, a couple of the guys I was working with doing caricatures, approached one of the alt weeklies. I guess there was only one alt weekly back then. We approached an alt weekly and said, which was called New Times, and said, we want to do a comics page. And they said, we don't really need a comics page, but we need people to do cover illustrations. And I did not know at that time enough to say that, of course I can do that. My friend Andy Hartzell did. He was smart enough to say, yes, of course I do. And
yeah.
So once he started establishing that, he left that alt weekly after about a year and suggested me. Yeah. So I came in, and through that I started doing, lots of illustrations, which is, really what I'd always intended to do. And started segueing from that into doing some writing, and it's been since then. It's been multi-pronged. I do comics. I do characters still. In fact, I do theme park characters. I do para characters. So
you've acted in some films, I think, right?
I've mostly do props for films, but since I'm around, I end up being I end up being a background character.
Right. But basically, the moral of the story is, if you want to work doing something you love creatively, boy, you got to be scrappy. You gotta be looking, and you gotta be trying, and there's a lot. Right?
And the answer is never I don't know how to. The answer is never I don't know how to do that. The answer is yes, I can do that. And then scramble fast to learn how to do that.
Well, because if you're a creative, I think you figure things out pretty quickly. I mean, that has always been my story was very similar in the sense that, I decided I wanted to try cartooning. So I spent two years in the library doing research, because the library is free, right? And all the books. So I did all my research and I did all my work and using a library to get me. So I spent 2 years building an entire comic strip and doing this thing. And then I got into some papers locally, and then they called me up and then they said, hey, you're a cartoonist, so you could probably do graphics, right? And I said, oh yeah, I could do graphics. I never even touched like any programs, graphic programs. And then they brought me in to take the test, and I had no idea what I was doing. But they hired me not because of my skill on the computer. They hired me because they liked my idea. They thought the idea was clever. And so I got hired because I was clever rather than because I knew what I was doing on the computer. Because she says, clearly you don't know what you're doing, but you had the best idea out of everybody that interviewed. So I can teach you how to use a computer, but I can't teach you how to have a good idea. And I think that was the philosophy that got me hired and kind of set me on my path on graphic design and stuff. But I've seen tons of your covers. I think, remember your covers coming out, you could see, they're very colorful and everything and vibrant, I remember. And if I'm going to try to find some online or something, maybe I can show them while we're talking about it here.
I've actually had. I'm stuck here in Connecticut. I was on my way to. Well, I was in Miami, about to work the Miami Fair, when the first day of the fair, they said, yeah, we're not doing a fair this year. Right. So I had planned to be out there for a month. I caught a ride with another artist back up here to my dad's house, thinking I'd leave from here. And then I got up here and realized that my dad needed me around. So I'm stuck here away from all my stuff.
Yeah, so it's understandable.
I did have my roommate back there sent me the cheapest computer I was willing to risk sending, and my $100 laptop. So I'm gonna try and dig through the files I have there and find some artwork. If I can,
it's all right. I'll hunt it down. I'm sure his stuff's up there, up here on the web or whatever. I'm sure your stuff. It's funny, if you should Google it yourself. You probably find a bunch of your work you didn't even know was out there.
Right.
But that's the thing, is just being prolific and doing a lot of work and putting stuff out there, and it's not easy. It's not easy because you have to be interesting, and you have to have things that are worth writing about and everything.
Right.
And so in the early days when you were doing comics and cartoons.
You've gone away from your mic.
Oh, sorry. When you're doing comics and cartoons. Sorry, I'm a professional. I know what I'm doing.
Repeat that. In the early days.
Yeah, in the early days, when you were doing comic books and cartooning and stuff like that, what inspired you, or what were your ideas? Where do they come from, do you think?
Well, I'm here at my dad's house, and honestly, my dad's collection. my dad is a history teacher, was a history teacher, and but he really liked comics. So the first books I devoured were those paperbacks of comic strips. So BC and Charlie Brown, and then Tumbleweeds. Remember Tumbleweeds, which and all those weird sort of gag strips. So I just ate those up, and he had a bunch of books on the history of comics, and sort of treated comics as a real thing, not a frivolous thing. So I didn't feel like I was out here being silly and wasting my time. I thought it was actually moving towards a career. So yeah, I mean, I have literally drawn all my life. I've at one point found a drawing I did when I was 2 years old. It wasn't great. It was 2 circles, and I called it a truck. But yeah, I mean, it's just I've always drawn, and always I look around me and I sort of absorb that and spit it back out into comics.
Right, but there's this thing. I mean, I'm sure you've talked to young people too that have liked your work or asked questions. And did you dabble in teaching at all ever?
Yeah, I taught at what is now CSN. At the time it was CCSN.
Right.
I taught cartooning there. Actually, I taught Jerry. Actually, Jerry was one of my students.
Yeah. And we were cartoonists for the UNLV Rebel Yell newspaper at the same time, and we had that great. I don't even know where it is in here. I probably could find. I have his book too, The Primal Squat.
Right.
And I think we did a crossover cartoon where I threw one of my characters over to him. He threw the Monkey Chuck. I think his Monkey Chuck threw it over to me.
Monkey Chuck ended up in the land of Nod.
And that's right. And it was brutal, but it was fun. It was a fun time, be doing that. But, just like me, I mean, I've always had this weird gnawing thing at me. And it's like, there's this thing that makes you want to express yourself or share your ideas into the world. But, some people aren't, either they're humble or they don't think there's value in what they have to say or what they want to show. And so they don't. But some of us, like you and I, don't really have that gene.
Yeah.
That's not, I don't know. I don't think that's narcissism, or I don't think it's an ego thing. I think it might be, I'm not sure what it is, but what do you think it is? I think it's this want to throw things up on the wall and see how people respond. Is it a need that we have?
Yeah, I mean, there's some of it's that. Some of it, I mean, I'm in that point right now because of this whole crisis. I'm not in a place where it's easy for me to create, and I haven't really felt terribly creative, and it gnaws at me. It hurts not to create. It's not like it's something I want to do. It's something I have to do. I know it'll hit me eventually. There'll be a burst of creativity if I've managed to score some art supplies. So that'll happen.
Well, you never know, right? But that's the thing too, is if you're a professional creative, so you've had to come up with inspiration on a deadline, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So talk a little bit about that, because I think everybody has different methods on how they keep things or create that environment. Because there's this myth that people have that, you get hit with a genius idea and it's out of the blue, and it's like, but when you're a working artist, you don't get to have that option. It's not like you can go, I'm going to go for a little walk. It doesn't. You don't have time.
Yeah.
Where do you think it comes from? Where did you draw from?
I mean,
I'm asking you big questions you weren't prepared for. I apologize.
Yeah. That's fine. I mean, that's what the sketchbook's for. I mean, you've got an assignment, and usually the assignment's semi-specific. There are certain things you need to get across. When you and I were both doing editorial cartoons, that was slightly different because you had a point you needed to make, but you had to find a way to do it that was not trite and not overly written.
You always had that cool framework around your cartoons, and I think there was a little rodent.
Oh, right.
The little rodent at the bottom that would throw. That was very Mad Magazine,
Yeah.
It's having the little character added to it's like another secondary joke, gag that you threw in.
And I actually kind of borrowed that from a comic book called Dystopic Snowmen, which the guy did in his college paper, and he had the same border on everything, except he would tweak it a little bit. So I played with that same idea.
Yeah, it had a nice feel to it. It had. Yeah.
It was confining in that it took up some of the, it made you recognize that it was part of the same strip, but it also took up a fair amount of real estate on the page. So you had to, I think I stopped doing it because it ate up so much real estate.
Yeah.
You know, you had a smaller space to work in because you had those set pieces in there. But it was a fun idea for a while.
The interesting thing too about the mechanics of comic book, it's not easy. I mean, people who think that oh yeah, comic book, it's freaking hard to do a comic book, and you have to think like a cinematographer. You have to think about the scenes and the balance of the scene and the arc and the story. There's tons of things, and you have to do all of it. You have to be the costume designer. You have to be the cinematographer, the writer. Everything falls into it.
And you know, the hardest part, the part you haven't mentioned, which is the hardest part, is the editor.
Oh yeah,
You've got to learn what not to say. You've got to learn there's certain information people don't need. I've got a strip sitting out there I've got to finish up called Waiting for the End of the World, which is sort of the wacky side of the apocalypse.
There is always a wacky
except that
you might be in the midst of it right now.
It's the apocalypse never happens or anything, but it's basically that was the concept. I was playing with the whole idea of people being excited about the world ending, so apocalypse cults and such. So that was going on in the background, but I was doing it as a online strip for a while, and I got near where I wanted it to end. I wanted to end at a certain date, so I started rushing and whipping stuff out, and I started doing these strips, and I realized after I got to where I stopped that probably 75% of what I did need to be cut. I need to go back and trim out, because I went back and explained every bit of background detail I made up in a long conversation, which is just painful to read, and none of it is important.
Was it cut due to length or content?
Oh no, I'll be cutting it. I haven't done it yet, but I will be cutting it, because what I did was I explained all the background stuff that the reader doesn't need. I needed it so everything made sense and everything fit in the right places, everything pieced together.
So you were making it up as you were working.
As I was writing, that was near the end. That's what I ended up doing.
That's rough.
Rushing so fast that I lost track of the building and setting myself up and being ahead of myself. So
I think that's
I will publish that at some point once I edit the hell out of it.
See, that's a relatable thing though for writers, right? Because a lot of writers are making it up as they go. It's not like not many people have the discipline to sit there and do note cards and outlines and backstories and do all these things and then they write the story. No, a lot of people just dive in and then they go and then they go in a certain direction, and then 3 chapters in they go, you know what, that was pointless, or I can't really end this the way it's like a Monty Python skit. There's no real ending here.
You've got to be able to kill you've got to be able to kill those children if they've gone the wrong direction.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's kind of and plus your style of artwork, and if you like I said, I've seen it and I've had it here and I've looked at it a lot. It's very bold, like it's very bold lines. You're it's funny because were you a Crumb guy? Do you like Robert Crumb?
I like Crumb. The artist that I was somebody who I was supposed to be working on a comic book at one point, and the writer complained to the publisher that my stuff looked too much like Spain Rodriguez's. Oh. And I thought to myself, I don't mind that at all.
No,
Spain Rodriguez all you want.
Right. No, the reason is the thing
my
about
stuff is not.
I like how Crumb does the scenes behind the drawing, like the backgrounds. This one's particularly because it's Las Vegas, right? And I think the backgrounds are interesting, and the shadows in the backgrounds, and why walls are dark behind certain figures and white behind other figures, and there's this kind of dance in the background, and that people don't notice, and they're not really supposed to, but you do when you're drawing, and then you're like, oh, I drew the figures, but they're just floating in nothing. And you have to figure out the framing of that shape and where the word bubbles are going to be and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
I don't know. That's the kind of stuff I think is really kind of interesting, and it's interesting into the mind of a designer, a creator, as you're designing these things as you go. And I think these are things like young writers and young artists, and maybe even comic book artists. those are the things they have to master, because they're a distraction if you don't get them right. You know, if you don't get them right, people aren't going to enjoy your work. And you want them to get the story.
You don't have to have a detailed background in every panel of a comic.
No.
Sometimes you can just have a black shape. But I do like mixing it up with stuff where there's a lot of weird stuff going on in the background. There was a New Yorker cartoonist, George Booth, and I loved his strips because they would just be weird. They would just be normal, everyday New England people, for the most part, or New York people. You know, it was a cast of eccentrics, essentially. You know, but there's always the backgrounds are always weird. There's always some sort of weird little details. That's weird, but very real. Yes, I know I've got a crazy aunt that has that weird knickknack sitting in there, you know. Or you'd have the extension cords attached to the hanging light, and then, you know, there'd be all these cords hanging, tied to the hanging bulb, but there'd be extension cords going off of that, and it's just, yep, that's weird, but very real. I know people to do that.
It's just cool. Look, I mean, like, I brought up Crumb because Crumb was real famous about putting like power lines in the background,
right,
or whatever it was, and it added so much. You know, just when you, because when you noticed it, you're like, God, he took the time to put that in there, and it has nothing to do with the story, but it adds so much to the texture of the
Suddenly you're in a plate.
And the weight. I mean, I always talk about weight in a piece. You know, that everything has a weight to it too that people have to consider. It's really kind of interesting. So one of the things I want to throw out at you, you know, because I try to make these about 45 minutes and stuff. So I was thinking this would be an interesting angle to take, and putting you on the spot again. But you were an editorial cartoonist and a cartoonist in general.
Yeah. In fact, you and I were both editorial cartoonists for the same paper for a while, switching back and forth every week. That was
right. Yeah. That was fun. But the job, as I was actually told in a letter from Burke Breathed that I sent him about one in particular that I wrote. He said the job of a cartoonist is to piss people off. So tell me about a time you pissed somebody off.
Oh, let's see now.
Mine was scary.
I made fun of the National Finals rodeo. I basically drew a cartoon of a cowboy, but not a cowboy, a National Final Rodeo cowboy. So, you know, get the I remember the one line that pissed people off was the belt buckle the size of a dinner plate. But yeah, I had a picture of a cowboy with a whole bunch of labels pointing to various things, and
cowboy. That sounds familiar. That sounds familiar to me.
Yelled at me. Yeah.
I don't know if you remember. I don't even know if you know about this story, but I had one I did on Ebonics that fell flat. So I did a cartoon on Ebonics, and I'm thinking I'm clever and I'm young and I'm trying and I really want to shake things up. So, and for people who don't know, Ebonics was a kind of a colloquial style of speaking from the African American community that they were going to adopt into the school system for teachers to learn it so that they could communicate with African American students.
Nothing sounds more natural than an old white guy trying to talk like a rap singer.
Right. So then I was this is how I handled that touchy situation. The framework was a white older teacher speaking to a young black student and quoting Martin Luther King about the nipping at the racism is the hound dog that nips at the heels of the black man throughout history, kind of a quote. And he said, now let me translate that into Ebonics for my African-American students. So I'm taking a Martin Luther King quote saying to translate it into Ebonics. So my point was, this isn't a necessary thing, guys. This is this is what I was trying to say. Now, I made a lot of mistakes with this cartoon. First of all, totally insensitive. Secondly, the framing of it. The white teacher was standing next to an American flag, way taller than the African American student that was below them, speaking down. He was speaking down to them. The use of something as sacred as Martin Luther King in any way, shape, or form within the context of this was idiotic. And it blew up, and because I did it for the Rebel Yell, and it blew up, and I got so many hate letters, angry. People wanted to know what my race was. They were so pissed, and I got every letter, and I read every one of them, and I felt so small, and I didn't know what to do. And some of them had phone numbers, and so I called these people, and I got a lot of hangups, and I got yelled at a lot, and I got called all sorts of things, and I apologized, and I was trying to explain my point. One person out of all of them said, quietly, she said, "Well, maybe I don't hate you now." And then she hung up on me. That was the best I got.
Wow.
And so I learned. I sent a letter. I sent the cartoon, and I sent a letter for advice from Burke Breathed from Bloom County.
Yeah.
Breathed. And then he
I
wrote,
don't know if it's breathed or breathed.
I say breathed, but
okay.
See, I've heard people say breathed. Either way, he wrote me back within a week, and he told me, "Hey, welcome to editorial cartooning. Having fun yet?" And I have a whole letter, and I'll send you the link to it. But it's a fantastic letter, fantastic advice he gave me, and he said that you'll read it and you'll see it, and I'll add the link on this thing too, so people can check it out if they're curious. Anyway, this is, but I just think that's an interesting thing, and I failed big time. That was a huge mistake, the way I handled it.
There's a lot of landmines in that area. That was a toughie one to tackle. I think it was Bill Malden. I could be wrong, but I think it's Bill Malden that said the job of an editorial cartoonist is being angry 5 times a week.
It's someone or something.
Yeah,
this is true. Yeah, and it is a dandy pastime, though. I mean, it is fun to, and I actually use that as a crutch now, because I really try to be open-minded in everything, and and try to be open-minded the way you view things. But every once in a while, you got to be sarcastic and you got to be subversive.
I got somebody walking to my backyard here. I thought I was safe in my backyard, but apparently, one of my dad's friends is out here and wants to talk to me about the yard.
Oh, okay. Well, you know what? Tell you what, that's totally fine, man. We can just wrap this up. We went 45 minutes. So, hey, I appreciate your time. And I thought this was a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. If we do more of these, I'd love to play with again.
You got it. Definitely. All right. Have a good one. I'll talk to you later.
Talk to you soon.
Okay.
Take care.